A couple of weeks ago, actually a few days ago, I preached a message. It was called "Give Up, Take Up, and Follow," or "Give Up, Take Up, and Step Up," and it was based on Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus said, "If any of you wants to be my followers, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me." You must give up, you must take up, and you must step up. The third thing he said was step up, and I talked about how that means we need to follow Jesus. This Christian walk is about following Christ. It's not about following our own plan. It's not about pursuing our own interests or the interests of our friends and family. Sometimes families strong-arm their children, and you're going to go to college and learn this thing, but not maybe recognizing that maybe God has another path or another vision for your child. And as parents, that's tough to take. I birthed this child. This is my DNA. How many more rights does God have over your child than you? God knew your child when he was still carried in your womb. God knows how many hairs are on your child's head. Do you? God knows the end from the beginning. And so make sure that we are pursuing the plan of God for our lives and not some other plan. And so we need to follow Jesus. Where's he leading us? Where is he guiding us? Where is he taking us? And what does he want us to do with our lives in particular? There are things generally we are all supposed to do. There are things generally we are all supposed to do. But then there are things particularly that God has for you to do. And sometimes we hear that time and again, and you guys always tell me God has a plan for me. What is it? Well, that takes finding out. And the finding out is usually put back on us to pursue him, to get from him the direction we need for our lives specifically. He may speak through another person about your future. I doubt very seriously he will in most cases. And if he does and somebody says something, even preachers, if they say something to you, feel like God's telling me this, you need to weigh that out and whether or not God's speaking through the preacher. It is usually the case that if a preacher says something to you, God's already spoken to you before. And he's confirming it through the person or the preacher. It shouldn't be brand new to you, like, hey, whoa, they told me I'm supposed to do this. You had something on the inside that was already stirring in you. I feel like I'm kind of supposed to be doing this thing, and then the preacher or the person comes along and says, I don't know if this means anything to you, but I just feel like God would have me tell you this. And then you either receive it or you don't receive it. A lot of times people receive things from preachers, and it's off base. I'm not telling them my own kind. I'm just telling you it's the truth. And so I will say something I've said frequently over the last many years, which is if you think I know every detail of your life, I don't. If you think God speaks to me about you and what you ate for breakfast and all other details, he does not. On occasion, he might say something to me about you, but it's never to your harm or to your hurt. It's really to help me to guide you to where you need to be. And so if I ever come along and say, hey, I believe God is telling me to say this to you, then you don't have to receive it. You can say, I think you're a crazy old man. Or you can say, well, there might be some truth to that. I feel like God's been speaking to me that same thing. Who's ever had that happen to you? You had something already going on inside. Somebody came along and said something. You're kind of like, man, how do they know that? Because God's already been dealing with you about something. So follow Jesus. The whole theme for the month of January is follow Jesus. Why did I pick January? Because January is typically a restarting point for a lot of people. The Christmas season ends. Bright lights, family and friends, maybe meals you don't have but once or twice a year. That season fades, the new year begins, and then it's back to the grind. Now, I don't want to make it seem like life is horrible because I enjoy my life, but life is a grind sometimes. Anybody attest to that? Life is a grind sometimes. Even if you enjoy what you do, sometimes it's a grind. And so we get back to the business of life, coming back to January, and it's a good opportunity just to reset, reevaluate, re-examine where we've been in our life with Christ, where we want to be in our life with Christ. Do any adjustments need to be made? Do I need to make changes? Are there some things I need to let go? Are there ingredients I need to add? So continuing then with the same common theme, which is found in Luke chapter 14, we're going to look at a few things Jesus said. Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 25. Now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Say, he cannot be my disciple. Good. Say, he cannot be my disciple. Verse 27, and whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Say that, cannot be my disciple. And he continues, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it, lest, after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, and all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, does not sit down first and consider whether he is able, with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Say, cannot be my disciple. And so 3 times in this series of passages, in this series of verses, he says, cannot be my disciple. So let's turn around that to a positive. So who can be his disciples, or what are elements of somebody who is his disciple? Well, he said 3 things. He said, number 1, if you're going to be my disciple, you must love me supremely. In verse 26, love me supremely. So Pastor Rob spoke to this last Sunday, which was the verse is not saying you literally hate everybody, but in comparison to your love for God, your love for everybody else seems insignificant. Let me say that again. God is not saying we literally hate our mothers, our fathers, our brothers, our sisters, and everyone else. He's saying that in comparison, our love for God is so great. You ever see bar graphs? Bar graphs can be deceptive, of course, because whoever makes them, but you have one bar that's, up here, and another bar that's way down here. And you could tell, because of the size or the height of the bars, the bar that's higher up, it's saying something a lot more powerfully than the bar that's down here. And so our love for God is the bar that's way up here. Our love for our family, our mothers, our brothers, sisters, is down here. And so in comparison, it appears to be as hate. It's not literal hate. It appears to be that way because of the difference. Number 2, he said, if you're going to be my disciple, you must bear your cross. That's verse 27. And number 3, he said that if you're going to be my disciple, you must forsake everything. So this is what these are ingredients of discipleship. If one or more of these things are not part of our lives, and we have to question our discipleship toward him. Now, this is not an opportunity for me to make you feel bad. That's not my intent ever. My intent is really to challenge you to examine your own life. Not to beat you up, but to bring you up to a higher place. Not to cause you to want to walk away, but to cause you to want to step in closer. The Bible says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Step into God, and he'll step into you. It's like those love stories, those love movies, right? The woman starts running this way, and it's slow motion. There's flowers and sunshine. The man's over here. But they're running toward each other. One's not standing there going, really? They have a mutual attraction to one another. You step into God, you're attracting his presence, and he begins stepping into you. And what happens in those films, right? They don't run past each other. They get to right in the middle, right? Either the man picks up the woman and swings her around, or they embrace, they hug. This is the relationship we should have with God. This attraction. We step into him, he steps into us. There's a meeting. We get together. We embrace one another. We walk with one another all of our days. Now, another thing Jesus said in this passage is that we need to count the cost. Count the cost. And he uses 2 analogies to illustrate his point. One, he talks about building a house. Listen, if you're going to build a house, have you sat down to determine if you have the capital to actually complete the structure? I was in another country a few years ago, and because of the lack of money and the difficulty in building structures, a lot of times these structures are built over time. And so At first I thought, because I'd never been to that country before, as I'm driving around, I'm thinking, this is peculiar. Why is there like a first floor, but then there's a start of a second floor, but it's not finished? And I thought, okay, maybe that they just never finished that house. Okay, whatever. But then as I drove around the country, I realized this was lots of places were like that. And I was wondering, what is going on here? And so apparently they do that intentionally with the hope of continuing the building process, but they only had enough money to get this part done. They began the next part and let it just sits there for however long it takes for them to gather the funds again and build another floor, and then they add on something over here, but they start something and then wait again to get the funds to do what? To complete the project. Now, for most of us in the United States, when we see houses, we usually expect them to be fully completed when we purchase them. And anything beyond that we call renovation. And so it was a curious thing to me. And he's saying that, listen, how many of you are going to build a house and don't consider how much it's going to cost to actually get the final product? He also goes on to say that what about warfare? You ever think about going to war? Man, if you do, you better think about two things in particular, maybe more. Do you have the personnel to do it? And do you have the resources to do it? And so he uses two illustrations here to help us to wrap our head around, what are you talking about, count the cost? And so he's talking about the cost of discipleship, of course. And following Jesus, there is a cost to following Christ. Did you know that? And a lot of times that's smoothed over because we don't want people to feel bad or think Christianity's hard. Coming to Christ is easy. Walking the walk, it can be a challenge. Walking the walk can be a challenge for so many reasons, not the least of which is either family or friends. When we've made that decision, they don't understand the decision, and they often begin to attack us. Now, when I was younger, the word Jesus freak was thrown around more than it is today, but you'd be called a Jesus freak. When you know those Jesus freaks? And of course, in those days, if you were proud to say, yes, I am. I'm a Jesus freak. But it was meant to be derogatory. It was meant to be a negative. So when he says, listen, you must hate your father, mother, sister, brother, part of it also is this. You realize that when you come to, some of you, when you came to Christ, your families probably pushed you away. You didn't hate them, but they all of a sudden, this lifestyle that you chose, pursuing Jesus, all of a sudden caused them to say, And some of them actually made comments to you. Some of your friends. You might have noticed, with certain of you might have noticed in your life that you didn't get the phone calls as much anymore. Man, don't call David because he's just going to, rain on our parade. We want to do this, but you know what he's going to be like. So I came to Jesus when I was 15, right before my 16th birthday, and I had a really strong personality before I got saved, but after I got saved, people knew not to say certain things to me. Not because I was going to beat them down, but I wasn't going to go along. Let me say that again. I was never out to beat people down, give them a hard time, tell them that they were in error, you're going to hell. That was never my style. But they knew I wasn't going to endorse certain lifestyles, and I wasn't going to promote them, and I wasn't going to engage in them. So some of the time, then I was left on the outside, which never bothered me, but it might bother some of you. How come I'm never getting invited places anymore? Well, that's a cost of following Christ. That's a cost of discipleship. Discipleship is not a casual decision. Discipleship involves surrendering to God, enduring hardships, and staying faithful even when it's difficult. It is not that at the first sign of trouble we cut and run. That's really not the idea here. There's that poem or that prayer, may the road always rise to meet you. Well, when you're following Christ, the road may not always rise to meet you. The wind may not always be at your back. And the sun may not always shine warmly upon your face. Are you going to follow him anyway? We're talking about the cost of discipleship. Counting the cost is weighing the sacrifices and being fully prepared to live a life that honors the Lord. Salvation is the starting line on our journey with Christ, but the finish line is at the end of the race. And between the starting line and the finish line, there is a lot of life to be lived. There is a lot of territory to cover. There are opportunities along the way, from the starting line to the finish line, to just quit. Forget it. Now, some of you were in sports when you were younger, and some of you may still participate in sports. I've always enjoyed competition. It's just the way I was made. I just enjoy competition. Being faster than somebody, being stronger than somebody, jumping farther, making more touchdowns, you name it, I wanted to be that person. And so because of being in sports for so many years, I understand the tension between wanting to be on the top of the podium while at the same time understanding the investment it takes to be at the top of the podium. It's one thing to sign up, it's another thing to walk out. Now, when I was in high school, I'm from Southern California, just actually not too far south of where the fires are taking place that you have probably seen. Millions of people live in Southern California. My high school had 4,000 students in it. My graduating class was 735 people, which probably was bigger than some of your high schools. And because of that, we had lots of people who would come out for sports teams. We had a varsity football team, a JV football team, a sophomore football team, and 2 freshman football teams because there were so many kids in the school. And so did the other schools around us because they were all that same size. So in my senior year, my junior and senior years on the varsity football, when practice started in the summertime, near the end of summer, man, there were so many kids who were on the team. Like probably over 100. But you don't even have enough uniforms to number that high. And then, of course, some drop along the way. But then when picture day came, the picture's massive. All these kids come up for the team. Then the next day after picture day, you don't see some of them you never see again. They just were there for the picture, get in the yearbook. They never intended to go through the season, to sweat, to toil, to go through what it takes to be a victor. They just wanted their picture in the yearbook. We cannot be those people as believers. Man, I just want to be, the picture in who's who among Christians in America. We need to be, whether we're there for the picture is irrelevant, but you better be there after the picture. We don't want to be the ones that Jesus speaks to and says, I never knew you. Yeah, but I got my picture in the yearbook. Because that's not the important thing. The important thing is following Christ. There is a price to pay. The question is, are you willing to pay the price? The question is, am I willing to pay the price? Have I ever wrestled with that question? Yes. Have I wrestled with it recently? No, because I've already made that decision. Now, when I first came to Jesus, I wasn't aware there was a price to pay. Because initially I heard that he paid the price. But see, there are other parts to the sentence that aren't always communicated when you're learning some of these things. Jesus paid the price. Yes, he did. For what? He paid the price for my sin. And he set an example of how I should live my life, but he did not pay the price for my discipleship. That's a price I pay. I have to be willing to pay that price. What does discipleship look like? I'll give you a few things. John 16:33. This is not going to be on the screen. John 16:33. Jesus speaking, in the world you will have tribulation. Now, tribulation is trials. Tribulation is difficulty. Tribulation is trouble. Tribulation is challenge. In the world, it's going to be tough. In the world, it's going to get tough out there for you as a believer. Now, he doesn't say it in this verse, but just imagine this. He said, listen, in the world, you're going to have trouble. It's going to be difficult. You're going to face challenges. You're going to face trouble. Follow me. And I don't know that many people, when you hear that, I don't know many people would initially say, sign me up for the trouble, the difficulty, the challenge. I'm all about it. And yet, in days gone by, our military used to try to recruit people that way. Join this branch of the military. You can be somebody. You'll be an elite soldier, an elite force. Only a few people who do this will actually graduate from this particular program. And so it's not unheard of in the world system even to try to motivate people. Come on, step up and give yourself wholly to something, completely to something, and don't quit. So in the world you will have tribulation. You're going to have trouble. Hey, believer, you're going to have trouble. Then he goes on to say, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. So I appreciate the follow-up on his first statement. But be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. I've overcome it. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 22, he said, Jesus speaking again, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. Follow me. Hey, you're going to have trouble in life as a believer, and people are going to hate you. Who wants to sign up? He goes on to say, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. In John chapter 15, verse 18, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. And this becomes a tough situation for us to walk in. I don't want to be hated. I don't want to be hated. I don't want trouble. I don't want difficulty. But what I love or appreciate about the Scripture is that he doesn't pull punches with me. He tells me what I am engaging in. Number one, I've already taken you out and snatched you out of the flames of hell. I've given my life for you. I've paid the price for your sin, David. And this is what I'm asking of you, to follow me with the understanding that there will be trouble or difficulty or tribulation, and that you will be hated because of me. Will you follow me anyway? The world hated me before it hated you. Our association with Jesus makes us a target for some people. They don't like Jesus, so they're not going to like us. That should not be too difficult for you to understand, because in political circles we see that. You say you are in favor of this candidate, and some people fall away. We can't hang out together anymore. You say you're for candidate B, and so it's not far-fetched for us to understand that following Christ, it's going to cause separation. It's going to create division between groups of people. Some people do not embrace the person of Jesus. Some people do not embrace his teaching. Some people do not believe his word is true. And so when we begin to speak about him, they've already decided they don't like him. In fact, he didn't use the word didn't like. He uses the word hate. He calls it what it is. And again, I like that. No whitewashing here. So Jesus is calling us to follow him, and there's a price to be paid. Initially, if you've never heard these things before, you're going to have trouble. People are going to hate you because of me. The world is definitely going to hate you. Follow me. What are you talking about? What? Are you serious? Follow you? But I can see him with a caring smile looking and saying yes, with his hand reached out. Will you follow me? You know, one of the military groups, the Navy SEALs, do you know what their failure rate is? Anybody know approximately what their failure rate is? The failure rate of the Navy SEALs is about 70%. Roughly 7 out of 10 people who enter the program wash out. So it's not a surprise that we consider them an elite group of soldiers. They've gone through hardship, difficulty, they've endured crazy, crazy things that most of us, if you've ever watched those shows, I could do that. Yeah, okay. Some of these things take place in Southern California. You're thinking, I could do that. They're in the ocean. How hard is that? You've been to the ocean in California? 2 things about the ocean in California. Number 1, they have real waves. And number 2, the water temperature is not Florida. In the peak of summer, the water temperature in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, is about 68 degrees. You know why they wear wetsuits in the wintertime? Because it's cold. And you have these Navy SEALs training. Some of the things they do are on the beach, in the water, in the cold, and they have to stay there. No wonder there's a tremendous washout rate. Just ring the bell. Who's seen those shows? Just ring the bell. They taunt them, right? Ring the bell. Just ring the bell. You can go home. Have a nice warm meal today. Have a hot shower. Just ring the bell. Right? That's how you tap out. And so the devil is always there taunting you. Ring the bell. Just tap out. You can go here and have a warm meal today, have a hot shower, just tap out. But even naturally, those of us who have pursued goals naturally, whether it's athletic goals or educational goals or business goals, your aspirations, those of you who've pushed through and overcome the difficulty that was before you, and you got to the other side, you probably threw your hands in the air or you cried or something. You were so thrilled when you did it. You don't have to train athletes to throw their hands in the air when they get a victory. It just happens. Say, okay, we're going to practice together, team. On 3, put your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 1. They don't do that. They do not. There's never been any training like that. There's a victory, and these guys, you watch fans in the stands, they do the same thing. They're so excited. What happened? We're victorious. How much more the angels in heaven watching, and those who've gone before us watching. They're cheering you on. They're rooting for you. Come on, run your race. Don't give up. Don't quit. We know it's hard. We've run this race before you. Keep going. And when you reach a threshold, another threshold, what are they doing? Their hands are in the air. They're cheering for you. God's not against you. God is for you. Following Jesus comes at a great cost, a great sacrifice. Following Jesus is not always easy. Following Jesus is not always comfortable. Following Jesus means you may lose your popularity. You may lose friendships. You may lose relationships with family members. You may lose leisure time. You may lose treasured habits. This is all part of the cost for following Jesus. Now you say, but I love these things. I really want to do these things. That's all well and good. Listen to me. Because I'm now to the age where I realize all those things I heard when I was young, which I was like, okay, now I'm going to live forever. And now I'm to this age, so I'm like, well, forever's quick. This life is so incredibly temporary. And we have to get our mindset and our hearts to that place where this is so temporary. I need to live for the next life. See, if we live for this life and this life alone, we lose everything. We lose the next one. But if you live for the next one, you'll gain that one, and you'll gain this one at the same time. According to legend, in 1519, Hernan Cortez was sailing to what is now Mexico. He was intent on conquest. Standing before him was the mighty Aztec Empire. His men were outnumbered. They would be easy to drive back into the sea, to thwart their efforts to take the land for Spain and the wealth of the land. Cortez, being aware of that, the story goes that Cortez, being aware of that, decided that he didn't want his men have any opportunity to retreat. So he scuttled or burned the boats. He burned the boats. They had no way of escape. In other words, the position they were left in was either be defeated, be destroyed, be killed, or advance and try to be victorious. Those are your options. You can throw up your hands and quit and cry and die in the process, or you can fight. You can advance and you can move forward. We know, of course, that his troops, over the course of a few years, 3 years approximately, they actually defeated the Aztec Empire. It's an amazing note in history that this mighty empire that had so many warriors eventually succumbed to his army. They had no retreat. There was no turning back. And that is what Christ is calling us to do. Are we going to turn back? We got on the path, but are we going to turn back? In Philippians chapter 3, beginning with verse number 12, this is from the Message Bible. I'm not saying that I have this all together, that I haven't made, but I'm well on my way, reaching out for Christ, who has so wondrously reached out for me. Friends, don't get me wrong. By no means do I count myself an expert in all of this, but I've got my eye on the goal, where God is beckoning us onward to Jesus. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. So let's keep focused on the goal, those of us who want everything God has for us. If you have something else in mind, something less than total commitment, God will clear your blurred vision. You'll see it yet. Now that we're on the right track, let's stay on it. Stick with me, friends. Keep track of those you see running the same course, headed for the same goal. There are many out there taking other paths, choosing other goals, and trying to get you to go along with them. I've warned you of them many times, and sadly, I have to do it again. All they want is easy street. They hate Christ's cross. But easy street is a dead-end street, and those who live there make their bellies their gods. Belches are their praise. All they can think of is their appetites. He says a few things here that are worth noting. I'm well on my way, reaching out for Christ. I'm off and running, and I'm not turning back. We're on the right track. Let's stay on it. Stick with me, my friends. Is it okay to follow Paul? The absolute answer is absolutely yes, because at one point he says, follow me as I follow Christ. You should absolutely be following people who are following Jesus, because that means you're on the same path. You're on the right path. If you're following people who aren't following Christ, you're on the wrong path. It's January. It's a time to assess where we are. It's a time to recommit our lives if necessary. And for some, it's a time to commit yourself to Christ for the very first time. So the questions, these are rhetorical, but who is willing to burn the boats to follow Jesus? Who is willing to abandon any way of retreat? The mission is before us, the mission is not behind us. Although it is easy to fall back, falling back is not the action we should be taking. We should be advancing toward the finish line. We should be moving toward the goal line. Points are scored when we get the ball past the goal line. A race is won when we're the first to pass the finish line. standing at the start, staring at everybody else running the race. You just become a spectator at that point. You're not a participant any longer. And if you run a third of the way, a half of the way, three-fourths of the way, and then stop, you are still no longer a participant. As soon as you stop, you're not a participant any longer. Have I ever wanted to throw my hands up in the air and just say, Jesus, I can't take it? The answer is yes. But then he reminds me that he's with me every step of the way. And I'm reminded of Paul, who said in 2 Corinthians some notable things that remind me of this race I'm running and how some people who have run before me have encountered great difficulty. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he says, he's speaking as, are they ministers of Christ, talking about some other people? He said, I'm talking as a fool, because he begins to talk about things he's encountered in life. In stripes beyond measure. In other words, he's been beaten. In prisons more frequently. In deaths often. So this man faced prison time. He faced the prospect of death repeatedly. He was beaten from the Jews 5 times. 5 different times. I received 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep or in the ocean, floating around in the ocean. He talks about how he journeys a lot, he traveled a lot. He said, in journeys, in my travels, in perils of water, like rapids, in peril of robbers or thieves, in peril of my own countrymen, in peril of those people who are Gentiles, peril in the city, peril in the wilderness, perils in the sea, perils among false brethren. In weariness I toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. And besides all these other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. This is a man who's following Christ, who's given his life to Christ, and he tells us, recognizing when he's saying these things, it's sounding arrogant, cocky, and he really doesn't want to say it, but he's trying to point out, listen, this is what the Christian walk is like. This is what I've endured. This is what I've faced. This is what I've gone through, but I'm still standing. I'm going to run my race, and I'm going to continue running my race. And when I get across that finish line, Jesus is going to throw his arms around me and say, well done, my good and faithful servant. In the challenge of sports, if you have a worthy opponent or worthy opponents, then you will toil hard to become victorious. And in that toil, you may become exhausted. And sometimes in the process, you're thinking, I don't know if I can go back out there. Coach, I'm worn out. I never asked to be benched in my life. Coach, I'm tired. Just sit me on the bench. I could be exhausted. Send me in. I'm not the only one on the team, but send me in. I'll give what I've got. Jesus is saying, are you willing to give what you've got? Are you willing to follow me in spite of the fact that it may be difficult, challenging? Are you ready to abandon any way of retreat? Are you ready to follow Jesus when it means trouble, when it means persecution, when it means hardship? It might mean hunger. It might mean poverty. It might mean danger. And it might even mean death. Are you willing to follow him? Again, it's January. We're talking about reassessing our lives, reassessing our walk.